Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Matthew Blom and this is the Medieval Academy. So for today, we got the first video in the sword collecting part of my channel. We're going to talk about the part 1 of the 3-part series for the review of the Valiant Armory Falchion base model in the practical line. So before we get to the first impressions side, I gotta tell you guys a quick story on how I got this sword. Aside from it being a cool story, it also gives you guys some background information you need to know going forward in this review process. So stay tuned for that story and then we'll get to the first impressions later in the video. Alright, so the reason I got this sword is because about a month ago I was on YouTube and I was watching Shadiversity's 5-part series on the Falchion versus the Messer. If you haven't watched it and you need to go watch it, I'll link it in the video description. Really breaks down the two weapons, talks about their similarities, their differences, goes through the Elmsley typology, how they were constructed. It's just a really great series. It tackles a lot of the misconceptions about the weapon. And I just really enjoyed that series so much that I decided that because I'd really enjoyed it so much and I learned so much about the sword that I wanted one. So I decided I want a Falchion or a Messer, and I start going looking and I post to Reddit and I ask them what sword they would recommend in the Falchion or the Messer. Or the Falchion and the Messer, which swords they recommend. And I got a pretty unanimous decision that it should either be the Valiant Messer or the Valiant Armory Base Falchion. So I first looked into the Valiant Messer and I got in contact with HEMA Supplies, Valiant's contact in the US, and I asked them how much it would be, and the sword wouldn't have been that bad. I think the sword would have been about $350, but shipping was going to be huge. Shipping was going to be almost $150, and I didn't really want to pay half a sword for shipping, so I kind of just backed out of that and I started to look at the Valiant Armory Falchion. And I looked at all the options and I really wanted it with the red grip and the red scabbard and peened. And I looked into it and at the time the sword was listed about $250. So with peening and shipping it would have been about $350. And that's not bad for a sword, but at the time I just didn't have that kind of money. I was about $100 short. That's going to play into the factor here in a second. But it was about $100 short, and I didn't really want to just take money from my other projects and the other things that were going on. So I decided I was just going to wait. I was going to wait till Christmas, ask for money for Christmas, and then buy a sword during the holiday season. Well, fast forward 2 weeks, and I get back on Reddit, and I have a message, private message from someone on the subreddit that I follow, Sword subreddit. And he's saying that there's a guy on My Armory, and I've never heard of My Armory. I've never bought a sword used. I've never bought a secondhand piece. All my swords were brand new. I'm the only owner. So I get on there, and he's like, there's a guy on My Armory selling a sword secondhand, and it's the Valiant Armory Falchion. He's selling it for pretty cheap. I was like, well, I've never bought secondhand, so I'm a little wary, but I'll go check it out. And I go check it out, and it's brand new. He's never cut with it. It's red scabbard, sharpened, peened. No, yeah, it's brand spanking new, and he's selling it for $260 and he's paying for shipping. So already the sword's close to $100 cheaper than what I would have paid for it new from Valiant Armory. So I'm like, wow, okay. So I kind of just send out a floater, ask the guy if he would pay $230. He counters with $240, and I go ahead and just say, sure. So I take the $240, get the sword a couple of days later. So the reason I'm telling you guys this is because I thought it was cool that literally 2 weeks after I had already posted, I had forgotten about it, accepted it, that I wouldn't buy a sword for 4 months. I get this PM and that, hey, this guy is selling the sword cheap. I get this sword that I wanted exactly how I wanted it, $100 cheaper than I would have paid for it literally 2 weeks ago. But I get the sword, and I had decided I wanted to do this channel about 2-3 days before I bought the sword. And I look on the Valiant Army website as I'm preparing this review in my head and kind of just getting some ideas down. And the sword's gone. It's not listed anymore. And I'm like, frick. I was going to do a video on this, and now it's gone, so my review's kind of pointless. Well, fast forward 2-3 more days, and it's back up, but now it's listed at $320. So the reason I'm telling you these things is because during the review process, I'll be comparing the sword to the price it's listed at now, which is the $320 price. So with peened, it'll be at the $400 price. So I'll be comparing it to the $400 price, not the $350 price it would have been, and not the $240 price that I paid for it. So we'll be evaluating the sword compared to the $400 sword you would receive from My Armory, or from Valiant Armory. And I also just want to let you guys know, kind of just for disclosure purposes, that the sword isn't technically new. It's never been cut with, it's never been used, it was well maintained, there's no flaws from misuse by the owner, but it is technically used. So just something to keep in mind. If you see some minor scratches on the sword or whatever during review, it's probably from the first owner, not from the manufacturer. So just keep those things in mind. But yeah, I thought that was a pretty cool story, that how everything worked out, but that's the story, so let's go ahead and actually get to the first impressions. Alright, let's get to the actual first impressions part of my video. So the way this is going to work is I'm not going to do any, this is the blade length, this is what the blade's made out of kind of stuff. I'm going to save that for my actual review after the cutting tests and after everything. That's when I'm going to go into the actual specs of the sword. The only spec I will talk about is going to be weight, and you'll see that later in the video. So the way I'm going to do this, since I'm not doing that, is I'm just going to go through kind of some pros and cons of the sword. What I like, what I don't like, and what I really think about the sword when I first got it. Let's start with some pros. So the first thing I liked about this sword was the symmetry of the sword. What I mean by that is, if you look at the hilt and the crossguard, they line up perfectly. So the crossguard and the hilt and the grip and the sword, they're all very symmetrical. The reason I mention this, and the reason this is a pro for me, is because with wheel pommels, which is this type of pommel, it's very easy for them to be askew. And when they are askew, and so when this is slightly off like that, and you can see the tail end, it's very noticeable. So I have a longsword that has a wheel pommel like this, and fortunately that's a hex nut screw construction, so when it gets a little askew I can unscrew it, straighten it up, and tighten it down. But it does get askew, and it's very easy to tell. And I like that since this is peened, it's very symmetrical. So that's the first pro of the sword, is that the hilt furniture is very symmetrical. And along with the symmetry, the fuller that it has near the spine is very symmetrical on both sides, if you can see that. Very symmetrical, terminates evenly in the same area on both sides. So that's another thing I like about it. Continuing with the symmetry and going into the hilt furniture, another thing I like is this part on the crossguard, these clover cutouts. I really don't know what they're called. I looked it up, I googled it, I tried to find out, and this is on several of Valiant Armory swords. They have this kind of hilt cutout, but I don't know what the technical term is. I don't even know if it has a technical term. But if you can see, they're very, very even. They're very precise, very well done, very even. This one's a little off, but again, it's very, very close to being very perfect. Something to mention is that in comparing this to other falchions, Medieval Review did a review on the windlass falchion. One of his complaints was the fact that these were very sloppily done. You could really easily tell that they were just kind of punched out and they had no symmetry to them. But these, you can line up the points, line up the bottom and right points, and they line up quite well. So it's very well done. It's a very nice part of the hilt. I really like how symmetrical those are and how neatly they're done. And it's a big bonus because like I mentioned, a lot of the Valiant Armory swords have this. So one of my personal favorites of the Valiant Armory swords that I want to get is the Malatesta, and that has this kind of hilt. So it's very nice to see that they can do it well done in a cheaper model, because that means they'll probably definitely do it like this or even better in a more expensive model. So that is some of the pros. Another pro I like is the grip and the sheath. So let's take a look at the sheath real quick. The sheath is very well done. I really like the leather on the sheath. If you can see, my light's kind of bad today because it's cloudy outside, but if you can tell, it's like this regal red or oxblood. I'm not sure which because I bought it secondhand, but it's one of those. I'm pretty sure it's the regal red, simply because they don't have an oxblood model in the sheath. But it's very nicely done. I really like the leather work. Valiant Armory is known for their leather working. I'm pretty sure Sunny, who owns the company, does the leather working. Not 100% certain on that fact, but again, they do fantastic leather working. And the grip is really fantastic. It's very clean, no offness, no looseness. It's just a fantastic grip, and it's very comfortable to hold. Don't slide, doesn't move. It's a very comfortable grip. I really like this grip. Of all the swords I own, this is my favorite grip. Very nicely done. The leather is comfortable to hold. The geometry of it is very comfortable and pleasing to the hand. It's just a great grip. So I'm really happy with the leather working on this grip. It's very, very well done. I like the blade geometry of the sword. It's just a typical, pretty much the most typical falchion blade geometry. One thing that I don't like is, just like in the windlass falchion, how it has this distal taper down to the bottom where this becomes almost like an edge. It's not sharpened. It's decently close. It's probably a little thinner than blunt sword range, but it's definitely not sharp at all. It's really not sharp. So that's a little disappointing. I would like if this back edge was sharpened. I'm pretty sure the historical ones were sharpened back there, so it wouldn't take much to sharpen up. Like I said, it's a little less blunt than like blunt training swords, but again, it's still pretty blunt. And I probably won't mess with it just because I don't want to ruin it. I use a power tool for my sharpening, so I don't really want to ruin it, but I would have preferred if that was sharpened, but it's not a huge deal that it's not. With the sharpening, this is decently sharp. It did cut construction paper or printing paper. It wasn't really fluid, so it's not razor sharp. It's decent at best. It's moderate. It's definitely not dull. It'll cut you if you run your hand across it, but it could be sharper. And I would have preferred if it was sharper, but we'll see in the test cutting part how it actually holds up. But it should work. So I'm not thrilled with it, but it's not crappy. It's not shoddy. So it's a decent job. And if we bring the blade close, you can see on the sharpening job that there is no secondary bevel. So touching this up really won't be hard because there's no secondary bevel. And the edge geometry, it's really nice. So if it needs a little touch up, it really won't take much at all. It would just take a couple quick run-throughs, but this won't be hard to touch up if it needs it for the cutting tests. So that was most of the pros of that from when I opened it, my first impressions. So let's talk about some cons. So the first con, and it's not a huge deal, but it is noticeable, and that is the peen. So it's definitely a bonus that this is a peen construction. I'll make sure you can see that in the camera. So it's definitely a bonus that this is a peen construction. I really like peen constructions. It's supposedly the most durable, supposedly the strongest. Your hilt is not supposed to loosen up, your pommel is not supposed to loosen up. So it's supposedly the tightest. However, this one is really roughly done. However, in Valiant Armory's defense, you can kind of predict that, because if you go to their website and you go down to where they have the peen option, it looks just like this. It looks really rough. It has the hammer marks. It's got the blackened scorching from when they heated it up to pound it down. So really the fact that it's this rough, it's not that surprising. A little disappointing, but not that surprising. Another reason I'm not that disappointed with it is because this is a practical line sword. Supposedly the beater swords, they're cheaper version swords. It's not in their special editions, so if it was in their special editions and I paid $80 for this peen and it came out like this, I'd be a lot more disappointed. But because I got this secondhand, got it cheaper, and it's a practical sword instead of their special edition swords, it's really not a huge deal. So that's one of the cons. Another con, and this is the weirdest thing, is a lot of times when you have a budget collector, a lot of people talk about in budget swords the gap between the crossguard and the blade and the tang. So this sword, as you can see, has quite a large one. You can see that on both sides. The gap is rather large. However, there actually isn't a gap. And I don't think it'll pick it up in the camera. But what this is there's like a cutout in the crossguard, kind of like this. There's just a square cutout in the crossguard, and then the rest of the crossguard and the blade and the tang are securely fit together. So there's no gap. There's no water getting through there. It is very tight. However, there's still this little reservoir of missing steel, and I don't understand why. From what I can tell, it's not like historically accurate. They didn't do this. If I'm wrong about that, someone can tell me. But I really don't know why. It's really almost pointless. It just seems like they cut out a little square of the crossguard, and that was it. So if they had that square, it would still be just as tight because there's no gap. There's no water going through there. Under the gap, the hilt, the crossguard, and the tang, securely. No gap. You can't see anything through there. There is no gap at all. But there's this little cutout, and I don't understand why. And it's really noticeable, and from a distance, it looks like just a crappy gap. But as closer inspection, you can tell that it's really not. In fact, it's really tight and really secure, and no water's getting in there, but it still has this cutout, and it just doesn't make sense to me. So I'm pretty disappointed about that, and I'll see if it develops into any issues. I put some oil down there and kind of cleaned it out because there's some pitting down there and some pitting in these quillions from when I got it, but I cleaned that off, oiled it up, so hopefully that won't be an issue. But that's a weird con. I don't really know why that's there, but I'm not really worried about it durability wise. It's just as an aesthetic side, it's a little disappointing. It makes it look cheaper. It makes it look less nice. And when in fact it is nice and it is well made because there is no gap, yet it looks like there is. So it's just weird, and I don't really like it from an aesthetic standpoint. But moving on, the last con I want to talk about, and this is a big one in reproduction falchions. I know I mentioned it early in the video, but the reason I got this sword was because of Shad Diversity's 5-part series on the Falchion and Messer. And in that, he talked about the misconception about weight of these swords. These were not armor bashers slashing through armor, cleaving through plate armor. These were made to cut gambeson. They were supposed to, and if you can tell, it's not, supposed to have a thin spine and a super sharp blade, and it was used to cut gambeson. I think what he said in this video, and I haven't double checked this, but I'm pretty sure it was around 12th, 13th century when these were circling. So not yet really in the plate armor phase, more of the gambeson phase, the really thick cloth. Multiple layers of cloth. So these were supposed to be cloth cutters. So they were supposed to be really thin, decently light, and really sharp. Now, decently light. When I say decently light, I mean 2 pounds or less. That is what medieval historical falchions were supposed to be, is 2 pounds or less. And if you look at most replicas, they are not even close to that. Most of them are in the 2 and 12 ounce range to about 3 pounds, 3 ounces. This one is 3 pounds, 3 ounces. And you can really feel it. Swinging it one-handed is really uncomfortable. It really hurts the wrist to stop it. Let me back up a little bit. It really hurts the wrist to stop it in the movement. And it's really hard to generate speed without breaking your wrist. Figuratively, you won't actually break your wrist, but it's really hard to generate speed and generate power in a one-handed grip. Now, two-handed, it was a lot more comfortable when I was swinging it around. So, one-handed, it's a little uncomfortable, and as I swing it around more and as I get used to it, it gets a little more comfortable, but it's overweight by at least a pound. When I weighed it on my cheap scale, it was 3 pounds, 3 ounces. It should be 2 pounds or less. So, very curious to see in the cutting portion how this does, how I feel, how long I can swing this thing, because it's a beast. Like I said, as I swing it around more, it gets a little more comfortable as I get used to the weight, and because this pommel is so big and so thick, the balance point on the sword is not that bad. As you can see, it's about 4 inches. That's not bad. So I wish they would have just taken a little bit off the spine and taken a little bit off the pommel. They would have kept the good balance point, and they would have made it a lot more historically accurate in weight. But the spine is really thick, the blade is really heavy, and because of that, they made the pommel really heavy. And this blade is just unnecessarily heavy. It's not unwieldy, and it's not impossible to use because the balance point is correct, but it's a little unpleasant, and I'm really curious to see how it performs in the cut tests, how I get tired, how it handles one-handed versus two-handed. I'm just really curious to see. So for the final review, we'll really touch on the weight and how big of a factor it was, because that is really disappointing. And when they first posted the sword, it was listed at like 2 pounds 12 ounces, I think, and now they posted 3 pounds 1 ounce, and I have it at 3 pounds 3 ounces. So it's a beast. It's a heavy brute of a sword, and it's not supposed to be. I knew that in buying a replica of a medieval falchion, but it is quite disappointing that it's so heavy. But we'll see how it performs. I'm really curious to use it in the cut tests. If you have any ideas for what you want me to test this on, go ahead and link it in the comments. It'll be a couple weeks before I get to the cutting, but I plan to do standard water bottles, some milk jugs, actually some water jugs, the big plastic jugs. Pool noodles to test for sharpness and edge alignment. Not sure what else. So if you have any other ideas for what you want me to see cut, go ahead and put it down in the description. I don't have a tatami stand or tatami mats, so I can't do that, but if you have any other ideas for stuff you want to see in the cutting tests, go ahead and link that or type that in the comment section or send me an email, and I'll try to have that out. But yeah, that's the breakdown of the sword. Overall, I liked it, and I still like it. I'm going to wait to make my final decision after the cutting tests. Again, the grip is just fantastic, and the overall aesthetics of the sword is just a really fun looking sword. So I really like that from the aesthetics standpoint, but some of the other things like the peen and this weird crossguard and just the weight of it just kind of take a little off the excitement. But I'm excited to use it. It's still a beautiful sword, and I'm pleased with my purchase. So that's my first impressions, and we'll see how it performs in a couple weeks. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed my first impressions video. Be looking for my cutting test review in about 2 to 3 weeks. I don't know how hard it's going to be to edit the GoPro footage as well as my camera footage, but we'll see. I'll try to have that out to you guys as quickly as possible. So be looking for it in the next couple weeks. A couple things before we go. One was I had a comment last week. Someone was asking if they could suggest videos for me to make. The answer to that is of course you can. So if there is anything you want me to talk about, or if you have a suggestion, or if there's anything I can do to improve my channel, feel free to tell me anything that's on your mind. Send me an email, give me a comment, and I'll try to work on all of those things. So if you have a video you want me to make, let me know, and I'll try to get that out to you as quickly as possible. Other than that, if you're curious what I'll be making in the upcoming weeks, or if you're curious what video I'll be doing next week, go ahead and follow me on Twitter. I usually post Monday or Tuesday kind of a sneak peek or a teaser on what I'll be doing in that week, just so you guys can look forward to that. Other than that, I thank you guys for watching. I hope to see you guys next week. Cheers, friends, and class dismissed.